Hey everyone, I'm Matt. And I'm Mike. And we're Bardic Inspiration. Today we're here to explain the combat mechanics of the new Marvel Multiverse tabletop role-playing game. Now the sequence of play is fairly standard when it comes to RPG mechanics. So you roll for initiative for the fight, and you start with whoever rolled the highest, accounting for modifiers of course. The book states that, as the narrator, you can choose to have all the bad guys go on the same initiative roll, or you can roll for them separately. If there's ever a tie, the PCs go first. And if there's ever a tie between the PCs, the player should have a roll-off to determine the order. Now, there is a special condition to be aware of for initiative rolls. If you can think back to our last video on the core mechanics, you may remember the fantastic roll. If you need a refresher, you can check it out at the top of your screen, or there will be a link in the description below. For any character, including NPCs, that makes a fantastic roll on their initiative check, they get to take part in a bonus round before the real combat begins, and only those characters get an action in this round, sort of like how a surprise round would work. Once all of those characters complete their action in the bonus round, you can begin the regular combat encounter. Now, as an encounter is beginning, you may need to determine a few things. If the arena for the fight is a little bit unorthodox, line of sight, standing positions, and anything within earshot may become important. Using common sense can address a lot of these issues. However, if the answer is unclear or leading to unhelpful discussion, the character can make a vigilance check against a target number set by the narrator. For a larger battlefield, range can also become a limiting factor for your characters. For any power that has a range, for now let's use 100 feet, attacks within that range are treated normally. Now, attacks made up to double the power's range are always made with trouble, but anything beyond that can't be made at all. The next thing that you need to be aware of is the size of your opponents, as well as the size of your own character. Most characters are average size, but certain traits and powers can make a character larger or smaller in terms of game mechanics. So on screen now is the size chart, which will list the mass, attack and damage modifiers, and reach statistics given to different sized characters. As you can see, an average sized person is determined to be somewhere between 100 to 400 pounds. It's important to understand that the attack and damage modifiers are both relative, so any attacker gains a +2 attack modifier for every step that a target is bigger than them, and a -2 attack modifier for every step that a target is smaller than them. Now, while it is easier to hit a target that's bigger than you, the game understands that it will be harder to truly damage them. Imagine running up to Galactus and trying to deck him in the schnoz. You have a huge area to swing for, but there's little to no chance at all that you're really going to hurt him. To make the math easy, your attack modifier is always the opposite of your damage modifier, meaning that if you have a +2 to hit due to your target's size, you'll have a -2 to your damage roll as well. So let's talk about what you can do on your turn in combat. The book describes a full turn as 1 easy action, 1 standard action, and 1 movement action. You can take these actions in any order, even during your movement action. You can also use a single reaction each round. These allow the character to respond to an action made during combat and can prove useful to cunning players waiting for a chance to interrupt. A player can also choose to hold their turn instead of taking it. They do not have to specify when they'll choose to act, with the only stipulation being that you can interrupt another character's turn to complete your held turn. When holding your turn, your initiative becomes fixed in place wherever you decided to take your new turn. If you wait until the next round begins, your new initiative simply rises to the top. Holding your turn cannot give you 2 turns in a single round. Likewise, you cannot hold your turn if your character is currently falling or affected by any condition that takes effect at the start or end of your turn. Similarly to holding your turn, you can also choose to hold an action. In this manner, you may reserve your easy, standard, or movement action for later in the combat using your reaction. Now, you can reserve a standard action even after using both your movement and easy actions on your turn, but you can only carry out an action equivalent to the level you reserve. For example, you cannot hold an easy action to make an attack, as an attack will require a standard action in order to complete. Now that we've discussed what a character can do with their turns, let's dive into the different easy, standard, and movement actions that you have to choose from. Easy actions are quick, simple tasks that your character can complete in addition to another action on their turn. These include activating, maintaining, or ending certain powers or conditions, communicating with other characters, interacting with an object or certain devices, picking up small items, or simply standing up, provided that there aren't any enemies nearby. Standard actions are where the bulk of your turn will be spent, allowing you to engage in dangerous or risky activities. You can also use your standard action to take an additional easy or movement action instead. Using your standard action, you may activate, maintain, or end certain powers or conditions, aid an ally on their next action, attack a character, dodge an attack, escape a grab or attempt to grab, interact with objects or devices, pick up an object up to one size larger than yourself, prepare for an action, or throw an item. Using your movement action, you can do more than just move your character equal to your movement speed. You can also use your movement action to carry an object, with certain conditions based on the object's size. You can use your movement action to stand up from a prone position with enemies within reach, or, once again, activate, maintain, or end certain powers or conditions. There are various methods of travel when using your movement, but whenever you combine two different modes of travel, you must use the lower of both speeds to determine the overall speed of the movement action. We've already mentioned reactions, which you can use once per round, but there are two basic ways anyone can use the reaction in combat, and these are called interpose and skulk. To interpose, an ally within your character's reach must be the target of an attack that is not also targeting your character. This will allow you to move between your ally and their attacker, becoming the new target of said attack, with the target number becoming the lower of your character or your ally's defense. To skulk, the opposite encounter must occur, where your character is the target of an attack that an ally within reach is not also targeted by. In this case, the character moves behind their ally, who is now the target of the attack, and once again, the attacker's target number becomes the lower of your character or ally's defense. Now, let's talk about dealing some real damage. In most cases, when you hit with your attack roll, you'll end up dealing damage. The amount of damage dealt is determined by the attacker's fight damage or their ranged damage. Rolling your damage on a hit is as simple as using your D616 and then adding any relevant modifiers. Rolling a fantastic roll results in the option of knocking back your opponent as well, with 5 feet of knockback for every 10 points of damage done. If the target is flung into an obstacle, this causes them to smash into it, causing damage to both the target and the obstacle in question. Let's say that the target was knocked off of a ledge and is now falling. A character that ends a movement action while in midair is now considered falling, and they will fall up to 500 feet at the end of their turn. If they don't hit anything, they will continue falling in their next turn. When the character lands and hits something, they suffer 1d6 bashing damage for every 10 feet that they fell, for the first 30 feet. You then add 5 extra damage for every 15 feet after that, to a maximum of 150. If that damage would destroy whatever object the character hit, they will destroy the object and continue falling. Otherwise, the impact will halt their fall. Whenever your character takes damage, it can come from different types and subtypes. The two main damage types are health damage caused by physical injuries and focus damage caused by mental injuries. These two types can have any of the following subtype: acid, bashing, cold, energy, heat, force, piercing, psychic, shock, or slashing. The example given by the book refers to the Punisher laying down a suppressive fire with his gun. He deals damage of the piercing subtype, but of the focus damage type overall, as he attempts to cause fear and stress in the enemy. The method for specifying attack damage types is the damage amount, followed by the damage type, then damage subtype. For example, 3d6 health bashing damage. Sometimes your damage is dictated by your character's fight damage or ranged damage scores. In that case, you swap those terms for the damage amounts place. For example, fight health bashing damage or ranged focus piercing damage. In other cases, your character may have resistance to damage taken from specific subtypes. If your damage resistance is equal or greater to the total damage taken, you suffer none of the effects triggered by said damage. You can have resistance to a single subtype of damage, all focus or health damage, or any combination of the two. In any case, it is listed following this example. 15 health bashing DR, meaning that you can negate up to 15 points of health damage of the bashing subtype. If your character takes enough damage to reduce their health to 0, they are immediately knocked unconscious. In this state, your character cannot maintain any other powers or condition, nor can you take any actions. Your defenses are also reduced to 10, and all enemies have an automatic edge when making any attack rolls against you. This clearly leaves you in a very vulnerable state, because if your character's health is reduced to a negative value equal to your maximum health, your character is killed. Whenever a character's focus is reduced to 0, they become demoralized. Like when you're unconscious, you cannot maintain any powers or other conditions, and you now have a source of trouble on all of your actions. If your focus is reduced to a negative value equal to your maximum focus, your character is considered shattered, frozen in place by fear. Now, this is a Marvel property, so we understand that the death of a character is rarely the end of the story. Many beloved heroes have died in the comics and still found their way back into the action. While villains might be quick to end the life of a hero, most heroes don't actually want to kill anyone. This game assumes that, unless the player explicitly states otherwise, any attacks made by the heroes will leave the target at least 1 point away from shattering or killing them. The narrator reserves the right to overrule this whenever necessary, so your character still needs to use caution whenever they engage in combat. Some heroes will choose to use a weapon to combat their enemies, like Punisher or Deadpool, so your character is allowed to use pistols, shotguns, swords, you name it. Each weapon has a damage type and amount. When using a weapon, your damage type is decided by your weapon of choice, and your damage amount is the higher between the default weapon damage or your ranged or fight damage. So at higher levels, you don't necessarily choose a weapon in order to deal more damage, but instead to utilize the damage type of the weapon, changing the bashing damage of your fists into slashing damage from a sword. Likewise, you cannot use your ranged damage when attacking with your fists, so choose your instruments of justice accordingly. After a long night of fighting crime in the streets of New York, it's customary for your hero to rest in order to regain their strength. Any character who is not currently unconscious, demoralized, or worse, is able to regain any lost health and focus equal to the character's rank for each hour they decide to rest. If they have the ability to go to sleep, you get double the totals regained. Now, as I mentioned, if your character was knocked unconscious or demoralized in the combat, they must be awakened once the combat is over, requiring a target number 20 logic or ego check, respectively. If another player attempts this check and fails, you roll a single d6, which determines how many hours it will take for your character to awaken on their own. If your character was shattered while on their adventure, they're now considered mentally broken, and they will require long-term care. The book suggests finding a new character to play while your current character recovers. If your character died, well, you should pick up a new character as well. There are a number of different conditions a character can be affected by throughout your adventures, such as bleeding, blinded, deafened, demoralized, grabbed, grabbing, paralyzed, pinned, prepared, prone, shattered, stunned, surprised, and unconscious. To go over each of these conditions in detail would take a lot more time than we have, so we recommend reading over this list in the book to gain a better understanding of their mechanics within the game. The last piece of this section goes over damage dealt to objects. Because this is a super-powered RPG setting, nothing around you should be considered indestructible. This chart details object size and the correlating mass, attack and damage modifiers, health, and the maximum number of targets it can hit when thrown. Every object also has a sturdiness rating, and these act as modifiers to the size chart when calculating damage resistance and hit point modifiers. Luckily, the book also provides examples of what constitutes a strong object versus a fragile one. It's important to have these charts readily available during your games because we all know how much superheroes love to smash and throw random objects around in combat. Thankfully, the book expects that players will share this interest, making clear-cut rules for attacking an object or attempting to throw it. All attacks against an unmoving object have a target number of 10, modified by the object's size. So if you wanted to smash through a small metal door, you have a -2 attack modifier when attacking, and the door has 10 damage resistance to go along with its 4 health. A damage roll of 12 is necessary to smash through the door when accounting for the +2 damage modifier. When using an object as a weapon, it's important to remember that objects have their own hit points. Objects used for combat take the same number of damage dealt to the target. When an object is reduced to half its health, it is considered banged up and causes trouble when used. At 0 health, the object is destroyed. The larger the object, the more potential targets you can have, again referring to the object size chart. You roll a single attack roll for all targets, however, you roll the damage for each hit target separately, applying the relevant damage modifiers given by the object's size. There are times when your character has no choice but to plow through an object, whether they are thrown or falling through them. There is a method for determining how to create a hole in an object, however, the book also provides the Plowing Through Buildings table, made for average-sized characters. Using this table, determine if the damage from a character's impact against the window, door, or wall exceeds the threshold for the object to break. In this case, the character plows through the object, taking damage, and continues plowing through objects until they hit an object that stops them or they run out of steam. Well, that about wraps up the combat chapter of the Marvel Multiverse tabletop role-playing game. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next videos on the topic of character creation and even a simulated combat encounter. We also have a ton of other content for you to enjoy on our channel, and it would really help us out if you'd like this video and maybe share it with your friends who are also interested in this game. Well, that does it for now. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.